Hi there. My name is Hayley. Today I'll be discussing the literacy demands in today's primary classroom. We will be looking at what literacy demands are, why they are necessary, and examples of how they occur in the three strands of the English curriculum.
These strands are language, literacy, and literature. For the purpose of this presentation, we will be looking at version 8.2 of the Australian curriculum. The examples of literacy demands that we will be looking at will be analyzed using either Dorrant and Green's 3 integrated dimensions, or Luke and Freebody's 4 resource model, depending on which framework supports the example given. So what is a literacy demand? Simply put, a literacy demand is something influencing the way in which we plan, teach and assess.
Demands, for the most part, evolve from the progress society makes in both its understanding of how we learn and how society functions. For example, the rise in multimodal forms of communication. These demands challenge us as teachers and pre-service teachers to adapt the ways in which we run a literacy classroom.
Not only does meeting these demands ensure we progress in how we plan, teach and assess, but also ensures that we build in children the skills needed to be functional contributors of 21st century society.
As our world changes at a faster rate than ever before, skills such as critical thinking,
inquiry,
and collaborative skills create lifelong learners in literacy and all other areas of education. As you may have noticed, I have used a text-to-speech converter for this presentation, just to demonstrate how technology is making literacy teaching not only increasingly dynamic and engaging, but also more accessible and inclusive than ever before. For this presentation, we will be looking at 3 types of literacy demands, namely, collaborative learning, multimodal literacy, and technology in literacy. So what is collaborative learning in literacy? Collaborative learning is based on the idea that through talk, learning occurs. Through collaboration with their peers, students actively engage with their learning and tend to absorb the material better than they would learning independently. The first example of collaborative learning comes from the language strand of the Year 4 English curriculum. This outcome expects students to develop an understanding that social interactions influence the way people engage with ideas and respond to others. An example of how this can be done is through group work, by looking at the ideas of others and presenting their own views to the group. This cooperative learning is a perfect example of collaboration, and highlights the skills needed to succeed in future workplace and social situations. This task requires the learners to identify the points of view they are being presented and those they are forming themselves, falling into the critical dimensions of Dorrant and Green's learning framework. This also aligns as a critical practice in the 4 resources model, asking students to recognize opinions, bias and points of view. The second example of collaborative learning in the curriculum comes from the literacy strand of the Year 5 English curriculum. The learning outcome requires students to reread and edit the work of others, assessing their text structure and language features. Within the 3 integrated dimensions, this task would meet the operational demand, as it develops students' knowledge of the language system. From the perspective of the 4 resource model, this is known as code breaking, as it at decoding and encoding codes, symbols and conventions of a text. The next literacy demand of focus is the capacity to engage with multimodal literacies. Literacy is no longer words in books, but audio, visual and interactive forms of communication. The first example of multimodal literacy in the English curriculum comes from the Year 6 literacy strand and requires students to plan, rehearse and deliver a presentation, selecting and sequencing appropriate content and multimodal elements to define audiences and purpose. According to Dorrant and Green, this is a cultural dimension,
which aligns with being text users and
text participants in the 4 resources model. The next example of multimodal literacy in the English curriculum comes from the Year 6 literature strand, requiring students to create literary texts that adapt and combine aspects of texts they have experienced in innovative ways. According to Dorrant and Green, this is a cultural dimension,
which aligns with being text users and
text participants in the 4 resources model. The final example of a recent demand on the contemporary classroom is the use of technology. As technology becomes so integrated into our everyday lives, it is also tightly woven into how we teach literacy, as well as how we define what is literacy. The first learning outcome chosen from the Australian curriculum is from the Year 5 language strand, asking students to investigate the organization of texts into chapter, headings and so forth, within an online context. This outcome is an example of Durand and Green's operational dimension, encouraging the student to analyze the structure of the text. This aligns with the code-breaking model within the 4 resources model, using codes to communicate meaning. The next example from the same part of the Year 5 curriculum, so the language strand, requires the learner to analyze the way hyperlinked digital texts are organized and how viewers interpret them. This, again, feeds into the operational dimensions of the 3 dimensions model, using the codes to communicate meaning, and aligns with the code-breaking component of the 4 resources model. The final example of technology and literacy comes from the Year 5 literacy strand of the English curriculum. This learning outcome asks the students to use word processing software to edit and publish written text and add visual, print and audio elements to their document. This is indicative of the operational integrated dimension, using codes to communicate meaning, and classifies as code breaking in the 4 resource model. In conclusion, society's increased reliance and daily use of technology, as well as understanding the need for multimodality and collaboration, have led to their impact on the way in which we approach literacy teaching in the classroom. Thank you for watching this video on literacy demands on the contemporary English classroom. My name is Hayley and this has been an assessment task EDU30010 Teaching Literacy at Swinburne Online University Teaching Period 2, 2017. Again, thank you for your time and I hope you have enjoyed learning about how we can adapt both what we teach and how we do it in ways such as this.